Hi, I'm Diane Brady. This is Forbes Newsroom, and I am with Brett Knight, who is our senior editor doing all things related to sports business. Brett, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. We are talking about Serena today. The big news, of course, that she is retiring or announced her retirement. Were you surprised?
I was maybe a little surprised in the way she did it. I maybe would have expected that she would announce at the US Open in a couple weeks. But I can't say that I'm hugely surprised that she's ready to retire. As we look at the last few years with Serena, her schedule has been dwindling as she's been dealing with some injuries. She hasn't played more than 8 tournaments in a year since 2015. When she played at Wimbledon in June this year, it was her first tournament in a year. She's been battling injuries with her hamstring, her Achilles, some other injuries as well. Her world ranking is down to 407th.
I've actually seen lower, so it's only that. You said 407?
407th, yeah. And she's won 23 major titles, which is a record for tennis's open era, both for men's and for women's. But the last one was in 2017 at the Australian Open that year, and that was the one that she won while pregnant with her daughter.
Yeah, and Wimbledon was pretty bad, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a first round loss, and so even though she's made 4 more major titles since that Australian Open, I think we all kind of saw that the writing was on the wall. She's about to turn 41 in September. It's easy to forget the way that she's dominated across her career, and as we've watched some other tennis players excel late into their careers, like Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, it's easy to forget that these sort of epically long careers haven't been the norm. The tennis player who Serena passed when she won her 23rd major title was Steffi Graf, who won 22. Steffi Graf retired at age 30.
Yeah, I was thinking about Martina Hingis used to be her arch rival, and that ended, boy, more than a decade ago, I think, at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that I thought, so for those who don't know, and I'm sure most people watching this do, that she announced her retirement in Vogue, it seemed almost perfect in a way, given the degree to which her brand is tied to fashion, to being an influencer. I mean, give us some sense of where she has gotten her wealth, because the winnings is just a part of it.
Exactly. I don't want to dismiss what she's done on the court. She's won almost 95 million in career prize money on the WTA tour. That's more than double the next best mark in the history of women's tennis. That was her sister Venus who did that. So absolutely, she's had a sort of unmatched career on the court. But off the court, she's been even more successful. By our estimates at Forbes, she's made more than 340 million across her career before deducting for taxes and agents fees. When you look at her endorsements, her appearance fees, all her other business endeavors, and so that career earnings total of 440 million or so, that's easily the most for a female athlete ever. Her old rival Maria Sharapova is the second highest ever. In terms of our tracking, that was 325 million. So she's more than 100 million beyond the next best female athlete ever. And as you suggest, she has been remarkably successful and consistently successful on the marketing side. She's had endorsements pretty consistently with more than a dozen partners over the last several years. Her biggest is Nike, but she also has a variety of brands, everything from Gucci to Subway to Lincoln Cars. And then recently, she has really been diving headfirst into investing, into venture capital.
Mm-hmm.
And so she has invested in startups for several years, but formally announced her firm, Serena Ventures, in 2019, focusing on early stage startups. And that firm now has investments in more than 60 companies. And in March, they announced that they had raised an inaugural fund of $111 million. So she's really gone, sort of headfirst into that venture capital space.
I wonder if she's inspired by her husband, Alexis Ohanian, and obviously that's where a lot of his success has come from too. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is that an overall trend really about taking equity, being an entrepreneur, as opposed to the usual endorsement deals of here's a lot of money, please wear our sneakers?
Yeah, definitely. That's something we're seeing all across the sports world. In tennis, we saw it recently with Roger Federer, who it was a major investor in On, the Swiss running shoe brand that IPO'd fairly recently. In other sports, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry in the NBA, all have huge investment portfolios or are founding companies themselves. Those three all have their own media companies. So definitely the trend that we're seeing in sports now among these superstar athletes is less about the sort of traditional sponsorships and that passive income and more entrepreneurial.
One thing, I want to go back to the impact that Serena has had on women's tennis. I often, Billie Jean King, I think, was one of the early proponents, certainly, of equal pay, which says something about women's sports. But talk about just how she paved the way for some of the, very lucrative deals we're now seeing for the next generation coming up.
Yeah, Serena has been on our earnings radar for now about 20 years, which is sort of wild to think about. It's actually worth noting that for a long time she was probably undermarketed relative to some of her contemporaries. Previously she was behind Maria Sharapova, occasionally behind Li Na from China, but the sort of late career resurgence of hers really propelled her to a new stratosphere. In the last couple of years, we're talking, she's making, 40 million plus off the court. Whereas, just a handful of years ago, when she was leading our female athletes earnings list, she was at 18 million. So, the last few years, she's really shown, she's both broken the ceiling for female athletes and raised the ceiling for female athletes.
Was she undermarketed because it's internal management versus external, given that I've certainly seen King Richard, and to what do you attribute the fact that she was under-earning her peers?
I think that's a really complicated question. I think certainly people have pointed to race as one issue in the past. For a while there were pundits wanted to point to her personality, that she was a little more demonstrative on court than some of her competitors. I don't really know exactly what the story is. All I can say is, for someone who was as dominant as she was, there were a lot of opportunities there that she didn't get that she probably should have.
When you think about the opportunities of people like, say, Naomi Osaka, can you contrast that with Serena? Because she's certainly off to a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Naomi Osaka has sort of followed in Serena's footsteps and now is raising the bar. Naomi Osaka is now our highest paid female athlete in our tracking. She's making nearly $60 million a year, which again, just a few years ago was sort of impossible to imagine for a female athlete. Naomi Osaka, has going for her this sort of multicultural background. She is both Japanese and American. So, she appeals to companies on both sides there. Having a young, fresh face with sort of a cool factor, she's done really well. But like I said, I think, Serena really paved the way for that and really showed what a female athlete could do on the marketing side. I think just this year, even as she was sitting out, in the middle of sitting out tennis for a year, Serena was in 2 Super Bowl commercials. So, that sort of tells you her, where she sits in the mainstream culture right now.
One thing that I think was it Serena you said was in the Super Bowl commercials? Right. Mm-hmm. So when we step back to women's sports in general, we're still seeing these struggles with women's, soccer, for example, that in terms of pay. And I know that you did the 10 highest paid athletes earlier this year, not one of whom was a woman. How are we doing overall?
Yeah, that's a bit of a complicated question. So there's definitely a gender pay disparity that still exists across sports. And the gap is narrowest in tennis, where generally the prize money is pretty similar between men and women. There are a lot of sponsorship opportunities that are there for female tennis players that aren't there for female athletes in other sports. You definitely see that in our earnings list. We've mentioned Serena and Naomi Osaka, Maria Sharapova, Li Na. I'll actually mention that every year that Forbes has tracked athletes' earnings data going all the way back to 1990, the world's highest paid female athlete has been a tennis player. But even in tennis, there are still some disparities. So, Grand Slam tournaments pay equal prizes to men and women, but that's not always the case at some of the smaller tournaments. And so, in one well-publicized example at a warm-up event last year for the U.S. Open, Ash Barty, who was the world number one at the time, won the women's tournament. She made less than half what Alexander Zverev got for winning on the men's side. So even in tennis, we still sort of see those disparities persist. Yeah. And I think there's sort of two ways to look at it. On the one hand, as you mentioned, no female athletes in the 10 highest paid. We rank the top 50 athletes, Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams, the only two women in the top 50. So on the one hand, that's a pretty sad statement. On the other hand, 2 counts as progress because there were 0 in 2017, 2018, and 2019. And, as we discussed, Naomi Osaka making almost $60 million a year. The ceiling has gone up. So, there's momentum in women's sports right now. The TV ratings are rising. Sponsor dollars are coming in. New owners are buying into teams. Leagues are expanding. We just really need that to continue because ultimately athlete pay is going to be a function of how much revenue that the leagues are making. And, if you compare, let's say, the NBA and the WNBA, the NBA's media rights deals are worth more than 100 times what the WNBA's are. So it just has a lot more money to spend on its players. So, if we can start closing that revenue gap, we should hopefully start seeing the earnings gap start to close too.
So when I want to talk, about retirement a little bit, because 40 is not an unusual age, and we've seen many. I'm thinking of Michael Jordan, Muhammad Ali, Tiger Woods, many cases of people who have retired and then they're back and then they retire again. So it's not. Can you give me some sense of when we look at other, GOATs otherwise who've retired? What's been the trajectory for them in terms of earnings after they finally stepped away from the game?
I think it is going to sort of vary based on era, certainly. I don't know that we can go back and look at, say, like a Muhammad Ali and really compare because, at a certain point, there was an inflection point, the trajectory is totally different. But, I think definitely if you look at, Michael Jordan, other athletes of that sort of caliber who maybe haven't retired yet, but are sort of approaching the end, a Tiger Woods, a Tom Brady. We definitely see plenty of opportunities for them to continue to earn after their playing careers end. In Serena's case specifically, she's got a ton going on. She's got, her venture firm. She's got a children's book that she wrote that's coming out in the fall. She's now working as a producer in entertainment. She works with a couple of companies with their boards of directors. So she's got a lot going on. And I think you can also imagine that a lot of her partners are going to stick with her. You look at the best sort of corollary to her on the female athlete side as far as earnings was Maria Sharapova. Sharapova has been able to continue to have some of her endorsements follow her into retirement. Companies like Nike and Evian that she was with for a long time continue to use her in ads. And Maria Sharapova is kind of an influencer at this point. Mm-hmm. She has made a lot of investments in companies where she's sort of working with them both as ambassador and investor. So certainly Serena's going to have a lot to keep her busy as she heads into retirement from her playing career.
So I can't let you go without, you mentioned Tom Brady, who is not retired. You've got your list of highest paid NFL athletes coming out. Where is he on that?
So Tom Brady is going to be first on the Forbes list of the NFL's highest paid players. That may just sound obvious, but actually, this is the first time on a Forbes NFL ranking that Tom Brady is going to be number one since we started doing this list in 2010. He actually had never even been number two on that ranking until last year. And so, Tom Brady is this sort of interesting case where, for one thing, he took discounts for a lot of years when he was playing for the New England Patriots. He wasn't necessarily signing the contracts that the market would have given him. But even more important for him has been late in his career, he started to really take his endorsements and his business portfolio seriously in a way that, he was sort of reluctant to early in his career when he was more concerned focusing strictly on football. We now estimate that he is making about $45 million annually off the field, which includes his endorsements and also income from all these different companies that he's either founded or co-founded. So there's a couple media content companies. There's a supplements brand. There's his NFT platform Autograph. He recently launched a clothing line. So, late in his career, he's really reaching a sort of new level of earnings potential.
And is he markedly above number two?
So number two this year is Matthew Stafford, who's sort of in that old Tom Brady model where he's not doing a ton off the field, but just signed a major new contract, and is capitalizing on that Super Bowl win this year. And as opposed to our earnings list of NBA players where the off-court earnings significantly outweigh the on-court earnings, and the NFL on-field earnings are still the bulk.
Brett Knight, thank you very much. I'm Diane Brady. This is Forbes Newsroom.